Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Time management, task batching, goal setting, these are just a few of the commonly discussed techniques when it comes to productivity. But something that often gets overlooked is self-compassion. What if being kinder to ourselves isn't just a nice idea, but a legitimate productivity tool? What if the way we treat ourselves in the moments of stress or perceived failure directly impacts not only our well-being, but also our ability to perform, create, and thrive? So in this episode, we'll be exploring the role of self-compassion in our productivity. And joining us on this conversation is hospital medicine physician Adrienne Mann. Adrienne serves as Associate Professor of Hospital Medicine at the University of Colorado. So we're thrilled to have her on the show with us today. Welcome to the show, Adrienne.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I think this is such an important topic to talk about because surely we don't talk about self-compassion enough. And I feel like, that whole idea of being compassionate to yourselves is just so far out of the question when it comes to some cultures. So before we begin and jump right into the interview, tell us a bit about your background and expertise when it comes to self-compassion in productivity. What is your role in educating future doctors about this?
Oh, that is such a great question. And I'm glad you asked it because your listeners are probably thinking, why do we have a doctor here to talk to us about self-compassion today? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I am trained in internal medicine. I practice hospital medicine, which means in my clinical job, I take care of adult people who are admitted to the hospital with medical conditions. That takes up the majority of my time, but I spend the rest of my time professionally running a coaching program for physicians that's called Better Together Physician Coaching. And in that coaching program, we use metacognitive or thinking about your thinking tools to help physicians access self-compassion in a way to combat burnout, imposter syndrome, and moral injury, which are things that dramatically impact people in medicine, not only in the States, but across the world. So I have a couple of different hats that I wear at University of Colorado. One of them is in being an educator to medical students and resident physicians in training. And then this large program I run, which is an international coaching program where we really talk about how different habits and belief sets we have around productivity and contributions and worth impact our ability to care for ourselves and care for our patients secondarily.
Yeah, that's wonderful work that you're doing. So, in whatever that you've done so far, what are some common misconceptions that you've come across about productivity?
I can speak to my experience as a physician and then those I coach, but I think a lot of us have a belief that in order to be successful, we have to have been hard on ourselves. There's this thing we all agree on that we can only get where we want to go if we're really, really strict and rigid and set really high and perfectionist goals. And then we kind of have to keep our own whip at our back, in a turn of phrase, to be successful. And so I notice a lot of people burning themselves out because those expectations they have of themselves are so high. And there's not a practice of gentleness or compassion with oneself in the culture of medicine, which I'm sure isn't unique to medicine, but something that we all experience. And so this is where we spend a lot of our focus in coaching people how to build habits around self-compassion.
Yeah, that's such a good preface for our topic for the day. But before we go further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Adrienne? And the first question I have is, what is your favorite book?
Oh gosh, I was excited when I saw you planning to ask this question, and I have three answers. My favorite book is whatever I'm reading at the moment, so it changes. What is always on my book stand, I have this tattered version of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and it takes me 5 years to read it, and then 5 years to read it again. And so I'm just always kind of chipping at that. I just read All Fours by Miranda July, and that has stuck with me. And next up on my list, I think, is something called The Tell by Amy Griffin, which I haven't read yet, but that's next.
Yeah, I love that. Are you one of those people who are into Goodreads?
I'm not. It feels intimidating to me. Should I be?
Oh, really? Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, probably don't read as much as you do, but I always find the social aspect very fun, the community aspect, because, some of the books that you might be into or want to read might not necessarily be the same ones that your friends or peers might want to read. So that's always fun to look at. But aside from books, are there any movies or TV shows that you've enjoyed recently?
My husband and I are watching Severance. And so that's been, the talk of the town between me and my husband and our friends. And also just when my mind needs to relax, I did just watch Love is Blind, whatever season it was.
Yes, Love is Blind is truly underrated. The first season, especially, I think is my favorite. What about yours?
Oh man, I'll be honest, which is I think you're going to have one of my collaborators, Dr. Tyra Feinstein, on the podcast soon, and she just turned me on to it this season. So this is my first season. But what I found, which is so funny that we're on a productivity podcast, is I found yesterday that while I'm trying to do my work, if I have Love is Blind on in the background, I am much less likely to check my phone and scroll and do internet or whatever. I got my work done 3 hours faster yesterday because I had it on in the background.
I love that. That's a productivity hack. We don't need to do this podcast anymore. Just switch on Love is Blind and do your work.
Type away.
Yeah, I
kind
do
of
find.
embarrassing.
Yeah, I do find that I have the experience as well with some TV shows. It has to be a very specific genre of TV shows. I can't explain it. Like I did that with Scrubs. Do you know Scrubs?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I did like first watch through. I did a proper watch through, but subsequent ones I just like put it on in the background and do my work. And like sometimes I'd be like, oh, what's going on?
For me, that's the X-Files. Like I think I could have any episode of the X-Files on in the background and be happy as a clam for the rest of my life.
I love that. Look, I feel assured now in this habit that I have that a physician also does. But aside from TV shows, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment? Are you a huge podcast listener or?
I go like this. I kind of in and out of podcasts. Right now, I'm usually driving my kids to school and picking them up, and I have very little time alone in the car. But a podcast that my kids love is called Short and Curly. And I don't know if you know about Short and Curly, but it is a podcast for kids about ethics. And it introduces ethical principles to kids. And it's fascinating. My kids really like it. So highly recommend.
Wow, that's such a good one. I really like the community of podcasting right now because a lot of them are really educational but also entertaining and for all different audiences as well. So I love stuff like that. But apart from the type of media that you consume, either in your personal life or professional life, is there anyone that you look up to or admire in particular?
So many people. I think about the people I surround myself with, and I I could tell you something I admire about every one of them every day. One that just comes to mind, I admire my 11-year-old daughter, Amelia. She is really brave in ways that I didn't know I could be brave. She sticks up for what she wants, and she has an idea of what she wants and is able to like verbalize that and articulate that and honor herself in a way that I don't think I learned how to do until I was 35. So I look up to my daughter. I look up to my mom, my husband, my partner in my coaching work, mentors across my professional life, so many people.
Wow, that's really nice to hear. It sounds like you've got a good, strong community there.
Yeah, I do. I'm really lucky.
Yeah, that's really good. My last question for you before we end off the segment is, has there been a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this date?
Yeah. In 2020, I obtained certification in coaching. And I obtained that certification because I had had a transformative experience hiring a coach when I was in a stage of real burnout in my both professional life and my personal life. I found myself, after having a couple kids and being fairly new in my career after training as a physician, really found myself lost and couldn't intrinsically find my own direction. We're really good in medicine at like somebody else telling us to jump and we say how high. And so I'd been doing that for a long time. And as I came back from my second maternity leave, really didn't recognize myself in any of the work I was doing. So I hired a coach, and through that was transformed. And I thought, I need to get certified as a coach so that I can share this toolkit with other physicians in training and beyond. And so that investment I made in myself with that course transformed my professional life. I mean, I don't recognize even what I'm doing. I couldn't imagine doing what I'm doing now 5 years
Yeah.
ago. And it's this coaching certification that allows me to do that. So that's it.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what are the three biggest lessons or takeaways that you got from that class?
Okay. The first is that turns out, I didn't know this before, but you don't have to believe everything that you think. So I thought, I'm an idiot, or I'm a terrible mom, or I don't know what I'm doing as a physician. And I didn't have the skill set or the awareness before to know that I didn't have to believe that, or just because I thought it didn't make it true. So I guess the first thing is thoughts aren't facts. The second one, I learned how to name and process emotions, which I think, interestingly, in medicine, we know how to have hard conversations and deal with those things in others, but less so in ourselves. And so I learned a lot about identifying what it is that I'm feeling and then moving through emotions and feelings much more adeptly than I had before. And then the third thing was that I'm really responsible for myself and the way that I show up in my work and in my relationships. And I think I didn't really grasp that fully until I went through that training.
Yeah, that sounds like a solid one.
It was transformed my brain, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you. So now let's jump right into self-compassion and its role in personal productivity. But for starters, how would you define personal productivity?
I was thinking about this in preparation for the call, and I thought, well, before we answer what personal productivity is, I wanted to see like what's the definition of regular productivity, which, if you just Google it, it says it's the efficiency of producing goods or services measured by output relative to input. And so I guess we consider productivity as like, what do you get out of it from what do you put into it? And if you use that in the personal productivity definition, we're looking at like, what do we put in to get what we want? So I guess I would say that that's probably the definition. The definition is how you use your time and energy to achieve the goals that you want to set. But I'll say that my initial kind of reaction to that term is I think it's still probably colored by this idea that our worth is tied somehow to productivity, that productivity is something we should always be aspiring to get more out of. And so I bristled a little bit when I was thinking about the answer to that question, and thinking, I think that personal productivity needs to have a caveat about what does it mean to take care of oneself while we consider the output in relation to the input.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like this is very common. This is a very common theme across so many different cultures, whether it's like an ethnic culture or like an occupational culture. That's your what you put into your work and the value of your work is equivalent to your value as a human being. Yeah, it's just really unfortunate. And so
Oh,
how would you,
so
yeah,
toxic, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
really, it only takes and doesn't give. That definition where our worth is tied to our productivity doesn't allow for humanity, which I think I know my personal experiences with medicine, but also mothering, honestly. And so I'm sure that it's not only medicine that's like that.
yeah, completely. And so how would you define self-compassion?
Self-compassion, I love to use Kristen Neff's definition, where she basically says that in sum, self-compassion is treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you'd offer somebody else. And so it really is a recognition that you are human, that you're not a robot, that you're worthy of kindness and connection and being seen as a
Yeah.
human the same way you would offer to someone else.
Yeah. And how would you describe the relationship between self-compassion and productivity?
I would say, unless we're deliberate about it, default, I think most people probably sacrifice self-compassion to achieve productivity. I think most people probably have a belief somewhere under all of the layers that in order to get the thing you want or to be successful, however it's defined, you have to be hard on yourself to get there. And so I would say that in most people, unless they've done a lot of work to integrate those ideas, at odds. I don't think that's how it's best.
Yeah. And why do you think that's not the best route?
There's an increasing body of evidence in medicine that shows that doctors who are kind to themselves and doctors who do have self-compassion actually provide better care to their patients. So, I mean, we do have some evidence that suggests like being meaner to yourself doesn't help you serve patients better, which is what we're all here to do. But it's confusing because we're not taught that, and we often haven't learned the skills of practicing self-compassion.
Yeah. And what do you think are the potential consequences of neglecting self-compassion from what you've seen?
I think burnout is a big one, and that's a huge problem in medicine, but it's also a problem in other industries. I think we lose a lot of people from the healthcare field because they can't figure out how to reconcile how to stay in this profession without without martyring themselves to it. And so I think a lot is at risk. I think our ability to stay in this job, which is a calling we were drawn to for some important reason and some values that we held or hold, so that's at risk. And then I think our relationships with ourselves and other people struggle when we're not able to access compassion for ourselves.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think this also holds true for a lot of other occupations as well. Like hospitality is a huge one, probably not as intense. I actually can't speak to this, but I imagine it to be like varying intensities and, in their own unique ways. I feel like comparing occupations is just not productive to the conversation at all. But yeah, I do see that in my friends who are in the hospitality industry where they get so burnt out. And they just neglect a lot of self-care for the sake of the job. So from what you've seen on the other side of it, what benefits does self-compassion bring to an individual in the workplace?
I think a greater understanding of oneself and one's own needs. We're really good at ignoring our own needs. Like a silly example is even just around, I remember being in medical school and having to go into the operating room for a long case and feeling too scared to raise my hand and ask if I could go use the restroom. It's a silly example, but like we're trained a lot to ignore signals from our body, or trained to push down or suppress the thing that we need in order to achieve some other goal, getting people to like you, getting into some certain school or profession or position. So I think first is just learning how to listen to your body and identify your own needs, and then advocate for your own needs is a skill that many people struggle to develop. I mean, for me also, that's like rest. It's how to know when my body needs to sleep and then honor my body and going to sleep, instead of the story I might tell myself of like, oh, I have so much to do. I should send all these emails. People will be mad at me if I don't, and then the work I deliver is worse.
Yeah, 100%. And from what you mentioned earlier, a lot of us are trained to do this. We learn from our teachers. We learn from older generations to do this. I remember that when I was studying journalism, I had a teacher who asserted that to be a good journalist, you have to be there in the newsroom unless you physically cannot stand up. And that was sort of the mantra that she was promoting. I think that for that time, it was definitely more of the general consensus, and it was about like training us to be hardy. And I imagine that there are a lot of these types of people in other in academia as well, teaching the younger generation to do that. So what advice do you have for people who have been taught this multiple times and have now internalized it?
I mean, in my experience, that's what coaching is for. Sometimes we don't even know that we've internalized something, like that message that you received in that newsroom, or this message that I learned in medical school, which is like, my bodily needs are outweighed by the needs of somebody else. And so first is just to, whether it's with a colleague or a coach or a therapist or somebody who's trained in helping unpack that, to figure out, oh gosh, where did I learn that? And does that belief serve me as I go towards whatever it is I think success means for me? So at some point you probably realized, whoa, like that belief around journalism doesn't serve me as I try to do this job I'm doing. And so I guess I wonder, like, how did you figure out that that was a problematic thing to internalize?
I'm actually not sure exactly when I realized it was a problematic thing. I think it's on some level I always knew that was problematic. But I figured, if this was a well-established journalist, I should be listening to them. As someone who is like 18, around that age in teenage years, and yeah, I imagine that to be the case for young aspiring doctors as well. Have you ever had students who have had that experience too?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us come into medicine or whatever field it is that we're drawn to. I mean, usually it's because that's aligned with our values and our purpose that we felt called to do that work. I remember, I don't know if it was explicit that somebody said these words or if I just understood it to be true, that like a good doctor is always available to their patients. And then I also had this message from society or wherever that a good mom is always available to her kids. And it's interesting to see where I have these two rules, that a doctor is always available to her patients and a mother is always available to her kids. And if I believe those two things to both be as true, I fail myself in both my definitions, because of course I can't be available all the time to patients or my kids. And so inherent in that is this tension in me, the human, about meeting these expectations I have for myself. And that futility feels terrible, feels like failure. So unpacking that is a key part to understanding where those beliefs have you held up.
Yeah. So, what are the steps to unpacking that internalized idea that you should always be available?
Oh gosh. I think, one thing I call this is just a thought download. So it's just getting your thoughts out of your brain onto a piece of paper. And then one exercise is going back through that reflection and seeing, wait. How much of this is actually true, like real, true, neutral facts? And how much of this is the story that I'm telling myself about what all that means? And so one of the things we teach in coaching is to help our participants or our clients explore, is this a story I'm telling myself that's really causing pain for me, or is this the facts? Turns out it's not a fact that doctors have to be available to their patients 24/7. I don't think anybody actually expects that, and it's not feasible. So once I could recognize, oh, that's not even possible, let alone expected. Now, what does it mean to me? How do I want to define what it means to be a good doctor? And then taking ownership over that definition myself instead of this idea of a perfect ideal.
Yeah, and from what you mentioned earlier as well, that imposter syndrome is such a huge part of getting to burnout and not being able to exercise self compassion too. So, what is your advice for overcoming that?
Oh, there's such good discourse about this from so many sources. First, I'll say that, of course, the imposter syndrome is not a problem that only belongs to the individual, and we don't like to blame the individual for feeling the way they're feeling. Many people experience beliefs that they don't belong in systems because those systems weren't built for them to belong in. So, first, we acknowledge that, of course, there are tables we don't feel like we belong in. Maybe those tables weren't built for us. But then, after we kind of recognize that we're operating within a system that wasn't built for us, then you can go back and say, all right, but this belief I have that everybody's about to find out I'm stupid, or people are going to realize I don't know what I'm talking about, which I don't think is a belief that's unique to me or unique to doctors in training or doctors in practice. And then asking yourself, but is that true? Like that thought that I have that I don't belong here, or people are going to find me out. What imposter syndrome means is you have that thought persistently despite evidence to the contrary. So despite sitting at the table, despite being invited to the meeting, despite graduating with the degree that you sought, you still have this internalized core belief that you don't belong. And so then our job is to say, okay, you got a lot of memos from society, maybe your culture, the way you were raised or whatever, that reinforce this belief that you don't belong here. But let's unpack that to see how it's keeping you from showing up wholly.
Yeah, and I have heard that there have been studies that have indicated that self-compassion can boost productivity through positive reinforcement. So, what can work professionals do to foster this positive reinforcement amongst themselves, but also each other?
Okay, give me an example. Tell me about an example you can think of a person who's struggling with either positive reinforcement for their self or self-compassion. Let's think of an imaginary case.
Imaginary case. Oh, I like
Yeah.
this. Okay, let's call person A Tom, and person B is Tina.
Tom and
Tom and
Tina.
Tina. Tom and Tina. Tom. He is struggling with self-loathing. He has had a troubled background from childhood. He has his passions, but he is troubled, and his parents weren't exactly the most stable either in his life. Brings that troubledness to work, and struggles to pat coworkers on the back and say, with a smile, have a good day, you did great today. Tina absorbs that energy. Tina absorbs that energy and starts getting stressed by the amount of self-loathing energy that Tom is emitting.
Yeah.
And Tina tries to offer some positive reinforcement. Tom
Deflects
realizes yes. Tom sometimes realizes and catches himself and goes like he what's the word? He offers the positive reinforcement back, but most of the time, Tom deflects it and goes like, "Don't know what you're talking about. I literally just sat here. Don't patronize me. Don't patronize me." Tom says.
Yeah. Oh man, Tom, my heart is breaking for Tom. Okay, so I'm hearing you describe a person who maybe doesn't have a practice of like knowing anything other than working their tail off to get where they are. And Tom maybe doesn't connect so easily with other people. Tom's got high expectations. He's critical of himself. He's critical to others. He holds them to high expectations. Tina's like, come on, you did great at that meeting. And Tom deflects and goes, no, that was stupid. Did you hear what I said? I sounded so dumb. Maybe something like that.
Yeah.
I hear you. I think like everybody probably knows somebody who you work with who you offer a compliment and they deflect it. Like, oh, that was nothing. Or, oh, no, I didn't. And I think that comes from a tremendous amount of discomfort that a lot of us have with receiving and absorbing praise, largely because we have cognitive dissonance when we think critical things about ourselves. Having somebody say something positive to us can feel really uncomfortable. So to diffuse that discomfort, we minimize or deflect or say something that, or maybe we just send the compliment back. No, that was great of you, and deflect the thing. It's a really common habit I see in people at all stages of training in medicine. I think what's the downside of that is that you learn then, Tina learns, that this isn't a safe place to be proud of what I'm doing. This isn't a safe place to offer praise to people who are doing good. This isn't a place where I can expect to receive praise that's honest. In fact, this is a place where I probably should deflect any compliments I get, because the culture here is that we don't do that. So I actually have a rule on my team, which is we practice accepting compliments and praise, and nobody's allowed to deflect a compliment on my team. So if someone offers a compliment genuinely, we have to practice receiving that compliment with grace and gratitude. And it's really hard.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh. And you can have like a compliment acceptance jar. So like if you denied the compliment, then you put like money in it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the year, we can all go and feast on, well, the economy is quite bad at the moment. So we can all go and feast on, I don't know, like rice.
But I think if you really call it out and say like, okay, on our team, there's no self-deprecation. And we practice accepting compliments here. And I'm going to say, Marie, I had such an awesome conversation with you. You were so prepared for our interview, and I'm so grateful for all the thought that you put into the questions. What does your brain want to say back to me right now?
Thank you. I tried my best. Yeah.
Oh, good. You did it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I definitely have like most people, I actually don't know if this is a thing in most people, but like many people, I do have that mechanic in my brain as well that initially goes, you're joking, like you're just being nice, right? Yeah. But over time, you just like learn to not act on those thoughts, and it takes a few years from my personal experience. I don't know about other people. What has your experience been with that?
Yeah, it's real hard. Like I'm very used to deflecting and minimizing the thing. So what I tell my team to say is, thank you. I received that compliment. Period.
Has there been a time? Has there been any time at all where like you've seen a coworker or a student accept the compliment, but you can tell that they don't truly believe it?
Yeah, all the time. But it's a practice. Like it's not easy at the beginning. And so I mean, we're talking about this as a almost silly example, but it is an act of self-compassion to receive genuinely, to absorb praise or accomplish or I'm sorry, to absorb praise or a compliment that is offered with sincerity. And so what if we just as a culture decided that we would give and accept compliments and that those would just mean what they mean and we didn't have to be weird about it?
Yeah, that would be really nice. Are we in the good place? That's a reference to a TV show, The Good
The
Place.
good place. I know.
Yeah.
It is like but imagine how much freer you would be then. Like if you knew that every compliment someone offered you was genuine and true, it would make me more open to hearing from that person a piece of feedback that I could do differently. But when we're in our heads about when people offer praise or compliments, that they don't mean it or that it's false or it's not true because I'm bad, it makes sense then that when we receive a critique or criticism or some feedback that's offered with an intent for you to grow or change, that then our ego gets really up in arms and defensive, and it can be really hard to hear that. And so part of what we're doing is training ourselves to like trust ourselves and trust other people, hear and accept compliments and praise, and be open to input from people whose opinions we care about our opportunities for growth.
Yeah, that's really well said. But I have heard that I have seen online a lot of people do tend to view self compassion as this lack of motivation or attention to detail. And this is not just something I've seen online that people say, but also something like a sentiment that I've seen in real life being um, iterated several times. So, what are your thoughts on that notion, and what is your
Oof.
advice for reframing that?
I think that notion is probably sexist, and that is rooted in the patriarchy. That skills that, quote unquote, soft skills around compassion or empathy and communication and emotional agility are feminine traits. I'm saying that the patriarchy has constructed it so that those are soft or weak or not ideal traits in leaders or successful people. And I think that that is just plain wrong.
Yeah. And what is your advice for reframing that mindset?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, when I can access this, I ask myself the question of like, who's benefiting from me being mean to myself? Someone's cashing in on that and it's not me. So
My
on a day where,
enemies.
yeah, well, it's not even that, right? It's when I hate myself, I buy diet pills, or when I hate myself, I spend money that I don't need on things, that I don't have on things I don't need. And so I think about like, what habits do I have that take me away from my goals because I'm uncomfortable being myself, and who's benefiting from that? It's usually not me. So one way I can reframe it is by saying somebody's getting the cash from me not liking myself and me being unkind to myself. And I am tired of paying their bills. I want to pay mine. And so take a minute, take a breath, and say, okay, that thing just happened. Maybe I'm not proud of how that went. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person or a bad mother or a bad doctor or a bad friend. I'm a person who's having a hard time. I don't need to get on Instagram and scroll about it. I don't need to fire off an angry email at somebody. I just need to reconnect with myself, take a minute, and then move back into my day.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love that 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 question that you posed, which is who's benefiting from that? Because when you frame it that way, in a way, dwelling like ruminating in these thoughts is the most unproductive thing you can do to yourself. And that's not to say like you can't ever have these thoughts. We're all human at
Right.
some point, right? Yeah, we're going to have these thoughts. It's more about like how much time that you spend believing it with your whole
Yeah.
chest, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, that goes back to what you asked me about. What are the 3 things I took away from my coach certification? And I think that's one of them, the belief that like, you know, the ones that pop up frequently for me, I think because I'm socialized as a woman in America, is like a smaller body is better, or a younger person with a better face is better, you know, like beliefs that I have that I don't want to believe, but that still pop up. I'm going to have those thoughts. But what self-compassion does is remind me that those thoughts aren't real,
Yeah.
and I can release
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. I've had so much fun having this conversation. Now let's talk about more of the day-to-day application of what you've just shared with us. So I would love to go, I'd love to ask you about what habits or activities that you would recommend practicing to train our self-compassion.
Okay. I'm kind of making this up on the spot. So first, if you have access to get a coach, get a coach. That's what their job is, to help you identify where it is that self-criticism is getting in your way. Then I would say pay attention to the voice in your head. That's the critical one. We call that the inner critic. That's the voice inside your head that tells you you're not good enough, or that you're not doing it right, or whatever. And then you get really curious about understanding that part of you. What is that part of you worried about? And I do this in a Google Doc. So I'll just write a big document about, gosh, the critic inside my head is telling me I'm no good today, and these are the reasons. What is the critic worried about? They're worried about me being rejected, or they're worried about me being exposed, or they're worried about something. And so what do I need to understand that my inner critic is scared of? And then the next question is, okay, but what do I need to reassure them of? Or what do they need to hear from me so that they can kind of drop the rope? Sometimes it's, hey, I get it. You're worried about being rejected. This is a group of people you don't know. But the truth is, you do this all the time. You're an expert. It's okay to talk on a podcast to a stranger. You're going to make it, you know? So engaging in not a tug of war with that inner critic, but a real conversation where you are trying to understand what they're worried about, and then provide reassurance and understanding.
Yeah,
So it sounds really meta.
Yeah, no, I love that example so much. And if I may apply this to my personal, not personal, like, yeah, my situation, because you shared yours, is that, you know, sometimes I do have these moments of self-doubt and anxiousness before a recording. But yeah, if I were to apply what you've just shared with us, is that, you know, yeah, I'm the host. I run the show, and the guest is, you know, trusting me to handle this conversation like a professional. It's okay if they have questions. It's okay if things go wrong. Things go wrong sometimes. That's completely fine. It's not the end of the world. Just stay calm and, you know, take the changes as they go, and just try to do your best, and that's it. Yeah.
Think about how kind, like that part of you that's scared, the part of you that's the critic, like how does that part respond when you offer those things you just said?
They're like, fine. Like,
Yeah.
sure.
Like, okay, fine, whatever. Moving on.
Yeah. My inner critic sometimes doesn't like to work that hard, so that's good for me.
Oh, that's so good to know. Like sometimes we'll have people do an exercise where it's like, hey, I want you to like draw a picture of your inner critic, or like find out, what do they look like? What do they sound like? Who's their voice? What memos did they receive about what's important in the world? Like really getting to know that inner critic before you try to shut them down. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to a toddler, but my inner critic is like basically a mean girl toddler. And, you know, they don't know better. And your job is to give them some more information. So I would say step one is get to know the inner critic and with compassion and understanding.
Yeah, I love that idea. I've actually heard I've heard therapists talk about this idea of like creating a character and then talking to that character as well. So it's definitely something that's practiced quite a bit for trying to overcome that imposter syndrome and the inner critic. Um, but what do you think are some challenges that might commonly arise when trying to do this?
Most of us are not practiced in this and it's uncomfortable. So I think the biggest barrier is a belief that this is stupid or it's not worth your time or that it's too uncomfortable, so you should quit. So resist the temptation to give up on the exercise. I think the other thing that is a barrier is I think a lot of us, I mean, it's human to want to avoid discomfort. And so in the moment, when we're in a spiral and the inner critic is kind of driving, that may not be the moment to try to have the conversation with them. And so maybe later you pick it up and say, gosh, what was that about? I really spun out today when so-and-so said that on the Zoom meeting or whatever, you know? And so going back to it with a fresh perspective instead of trying to like resist it in the moment.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I do that a lot. Like sometimes the inner critic character just takes over and that's okay. Sometimes they just got to do their thing as long as it's not harming anyone, obviously.
Just
yeah,
you.
Yeah, just you.
Only
Self-harm
you.
is fine. Not advocating for self-harm, just to be clear. But yeah, that is definitely something that you have to get used to. I remember the first time that I tried doing that. I was so uncomfortable with it. I couldn't take it seriously. I learned that in the therapist's office, by the way, not at home. So yeah, and just like having someone else there as well who I like wasn't that familiar with what was quite difficult. So like if anyone's listening and has tried to do it, think about like whether another person's been there. It might be easier to do behind closed doors on your own. Yeah. And sometimes it takes a while.
Yeah. And sometimes a professional is the right person to help you process those things. And for things where the inner critic is deeply entrenched or the inner critic drives you to be doing some truly it could be on the spectrum of like true self-harm or just kind of self-abandonment and neglect of self. Go to a professional for that. But I think if you can be curious, like if you're in a place where it's psychologically safe to be curious about what is it that's going on here? What is that part of me so scared about? There's a lot of power in asking yourself that question.
Yeah, it is. It does sound really meta, like you said, but it is so important to self-discovery and learning what works for you. Because ultimately, it's very hard to prescribe advice to every single individual. You kind of have to learn more about why your mind works the way that it does. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing all of that with us, Adrienne. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you and chat with you about this. I had such a good time to talk about this, and you've been such fun as well.
Oh goodness, thank you. It's been a blast being here. This is really fun.
So now let's move on to the open mic segment. This is where you'll get the opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
Okay. I think I want to talk for a little bit about the power of doing this work in a group. And so the program that I run is called Better Together Physician Coaching. We coach physicians at all stages of training. So that's medical students, residents, and fellows who are in training and physicians who are done. And it's really, we talked about having these conversations one-on-one with a therapist or with a coach. And I think that's really powerful. But one of the things that we've found in our program, which we've studied in randomized control trials. So what I mean by that is, we get a bunch of participants, randomize them to either receive the intervention or not receive the intervention. And then we've studied Their results in domains of burnout, imposter syndrome, moral injury, et cetera. And what we found is group coaching, so coaching in a group with other people who are going through similar things as you, has a really profound impact on moral injury, self-compassion, and well-being. And so I think what I want to say is there's a real power in disclosing these hard things and talking about these hard things in groups that are facilitated by a professional. And that it's scary to share stuff in public, but that the act of doing that and allowing oneself to be seen by other people, and then the act of observing that in someone else is so incredibly powerful, because it reminds us, I think, that we're not robots and we're not alone, and that really, truly, there can be a human connection even in the hardest times, and even when you're the hardest on yourself, that's even more powerful than one-on-one, what we've seen in other one-on-one coaching interventions. So I'm just going to use that as a plug for group coaching as an intervention to help people process things like this.
Yeah, I love that idea. Just because, sometimes when it's a one-on-one thing, it can feel isolating. You don't have that connection to someone else who's going through what you're going through. And with group coaching, you can have that aspect of community as well. So that's a fantastic idea. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can go to bettertogetherphysiciancoaching.com.
Amazing. We'll link that in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you once again, Adrienne, for joining us today. Had so much fun. And we'll catch you in the next episode.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.